Stalin is being resurrected as a great leader in Russia today. Russians often mock themselves, saying their past is very unpredictable. But some aren't laughing anymore. Alexander Kuznetsov teaches history in one of Moscow's high schools. He's worried because next year he's expected to use a brand new history book to teach his teenage students.
I'm not going to teach that Stalin was a great national hero. I'm not going to teach that only thanks to Stalin we have won the war. I'm not going to teach that there were just a few crimes and a lot of great things. No, I'm not going to teach that.
This book is already available for teachers and will soon be adapted for students. Camps, deportations, millions of victims are hardly mentioned. Stalin is presented as the greatest Soviet leader. Gorbachev, Yeltsin, Russians shouldn't be too proud of. But Vladimir Putin is presented as a great president. Why not, says the author. It simply follows the latest opinion polls.
Around three-quarters of Russians consider Putin a very good leader. In my book, I reflect the opinion of 65% of Russians. The same for Stalin. I'm surprised that you are surprised. The majority of people consider him as a great leader. Why historians' opinion should be different from the majority? This President Putin's spokesperson says, to bring up patriots, we should rely on our education system. Too many great achievements of our history have been excluded from the curriculum for young generations. Kremlin has organized a series of conferences for history teachers to promote this new program. For the first time since the end of communism, a history textbook is promoted in such a manner. Distinguished members of the Russian Academy of Science have approved the book. The majority of our textbooks have been written in the 1990s, and that was a period of mad revenge, says the head of the Institute of Russian History. It's time to balance things a little better. This man is an author of the most widely spread history textbook used in the 1990s. His book is now banished by the Ministry of Education because it is considered too critical of Stalin and Putin. Anton Antonov-Ovsenko is 88 years old, and he knows all too well about the Stalin years. His mother and father died in a gulag, a concentration camp. He himself spent 14 years in several gulags. He started a small museum, the only gulag museum in Moscow, and he is disappointed that few Russians have any interest in this dark period of their history. There are 2,000 schools in Moscow, he says, but his museum rarely sees more than one school children group a week. Stalin was a criminal and his regime was criminal. History will remember him as a great tyrant and assassin, and it is a shame that they want to elevate him now. Sasha Burdonsky is Joseph Stalin's great son. He is a well-respected theater director in Moscow. The shadow his grandfather cast on his entire life has been almost unbearable to him. But still, he agrees. Stalin's positive contribution to Russian history should also be remembered. It is easy to cross out. He was a phenomenon we should try to understand and analyze. To me, today's approach is more interesting. These high school students have mixed feelings about Stalin.
My grandmother, she's 93 years old, and she cries when she heard about Stalin. She said, "Oh, he's so good person because he won the Second World War and he's our father." She still thinks about that he's very nice and so on.
Stalin, at one side, is a very strong person. But I think that sometimes a strong person is a very cruel person.
For Igor Dolutsky, the way history is going to be taught from now on is good mainly for Vladimir Putin. Tough leader, for tough times. It shows three great leaders, Ivan the Terrible, Peter the Great, and Stalin. Putin is the fourth one. They all tried to modernize Russia, but had to deal with resisting elites. Tough measures were necessary to install order. But this pattern is not based on facts. It's a falsification of history. Alexei Kuznetsov is going to carry on teaching history his way. But he doesn't know for how much longer.
They try to portray Putin as an ideal leader for Russia, which again, basically it is based on the idea that we Russians are different, we have a special mentality, we have a special way of living and so on, and that's why we don't need really democratic procedures, we don't need Western kind of democracy. What we need is sovereign democracy, which is an absolute nonsense. Democracy can't be sovereign. Sovereign democracy is another word for dictatorship, isn't it? Yeah?
Поставлено в вину одному человеку.
Stalin would have never appeared if there was no demand for him, like Hitler and Mussolini. The need was there at the time. Therefore, what he did, his wrongdoings, should be shared with other people of his time, who could be blamed even more. Alexandra Shatska, CBC News, Moscow.
Welcome back. A journalist here at the CBC who has covered Russia for many years is producer Alex Brinson. He's headed to Moscow next week to work on a documentary exploring something the West has never fully understood, the undeniable popularity of Vladimir Putin and of many of his policies. Welcome, Alex. I see you. This is what you're aiming for in this documentary. Where are you going and how are you going to show us? What is this attraction?
Well, back in 1996, when there was an election involving Boris Yeltsin at the time and the communist challenger, we found a family just outside St. Petersburg, which is, by the way, where Vladimir Putin, the current president, and the likely future president, Dmitry Medvedev, are from. And they were a very normal, typical family, husband and a wife, 2 kids. And they had a debate at the time about whether Russia should go back towards communism or forward towards democracy, as it was seen that way. And there were lots of fights, and we documented that. Russia evolved. 4 years later, there wasn't much challenge to Vladimir Putin, who replaced Boris Yeltsin, and the family agreed this time. So we're going back to them now. Their kids have grown, and we want to explore what it is that seemingly instinctively for us is very difficult to understand, that Vladimir Putin, with all the faults that exist in Russia and democracy, is popular among many people.
Is it just a question that most people feel their lives are getting better, or is there something deeper than that is attraction?
I think it's all a matter of comparison. During the Yeltsin era in the 1990s, there were all kinds of problems that had to do with the change in the economy. It had to do with natural resources, with oil prices and so on. And so people were suffering more greatly than they were even under the Soviet rule. Salaries weren't paid, pensions weren't paid. There was a certain mess about the way that this so-called democracy worked. And Vladimir Putin came in, something that was very lucky for him. The oil prices went up, but also the ground was set for improving the economy, for actually moving to a market economy. And he took advantage of that, while at the same time removing many of the freedoms that were existent in the Yeltsin era.
But is there a yearning for a strong man? Has it always been there in Russia, Soviet Union, throughout its history?
They have never had anything else. So partly it's just simply a matter of habit, but also in this particular case, they see a weak man, whom they saw Yeltsin being in many ways, and a strong man, Putin. And in their minds, because their lives have improved, even though they're not particularly good by our standards, they connect the two. And so when you have a history of no democracy and your life standard has improved, you make the connection and then you jump to the conclusion that you need a strongman.
We don't have very long, less than half a minute, but what do we make of his successor, Dmitry Medvedev? Is he going to be a puppet?
This is something that a lot of people are projecting, and it might be something that Vladimir Putin himself is hoping, because he is, in a sense, left without leaving. He is going to be most likely the prime minister. But if you look at Russia's history, there has never been a puppet. There have been situations where people thought they would be puppets, whether you look at Stalin, who replaced Lenin, whether you look at Nikita Khrushchev, who came in 1956, whether you look at Leonid Brezhnev. These are the people that we've heard about. Every one of them at the time was thought that he would be controlled by someone. But the best example is Vladimir Putin himself. He came in the year 2000 out of nowhere. No one ever heard of him. The people that put him in thought that they would control him, and in about a month or two, he threw him away. And this is kind of what people think about Medvedev. Who knows?
Alex, fascinating. Thanks very much. Have a good trip. Thank you. And that's it for this week. You can contact us at ourworld@cbc.ca. I'm Brian Stewart for everyone at Our World. See you next Sunday.